So this movie is about sending the workbook, or a link to the workbook, to a recipient. We can send the workbook as an attachment to an email. We can send a link to the workbook, provided the workbook is saved in a shared location. We can send the workbook as a PDF, a portable document format, or we can send it as an XPS, which stands for XML Paper Specification file, which is sort of Microsoft version of the PDF format. Or if you have the necessary third-party service, you can send it to a recipient as an Internet Fax. So I'm in a blank workbook, and in order for us to engage these options that we have to send the workbook to somebody, mostly via email, we're going to press Alt-F-H to get to the share area, and then E for email. The first option, and I'm going to escape to get rid of those letters, is to send it as an attachment. When we click that, the default email application opens up and the workbook is attached to an email, so you can address the email, put some content in the body of the email, and send off a copy of your workbook to somebody. So the good thing about this is that you can actually propagate your workbook and send it to recipients. The bad thing is that it's an actual copy of the workbook. And so any changes you make after you send this workbook copy out to somebody won't be reflected in their copy, and vice versa. If they make some changes, it's not going to be reflected in your copy. And if you have an extremely large workbook, you may not be able to email it as an attachment at all unless you zip it down to a smaller size. So I'm going to close this, and we're going to go back to Alt-F-H-E and look at the second option. The second option, to send a link to the workbook, sort of solves the problems of sending it as an attachment. The requirement is, though, that the workbook has to be saved in a shared location, so people have to have access, which may include some security settings, to that link to access the workbook. With this method, though, there's only one version or one copy of the workbook. Any changes made by anybody will be saved to that one copy of the workbook. And a link to a workbook is going to be relatively small in size, as opposed to trying to email somebody a 50 megabyte spreadsheet. So anybody that accesses that workbook will have a view of the latest and greatest version of the workbook. Alternatively, you can send the workbook as a PDF file. So when I click on Send as PDF, Portable Document Format File, I get an error message because I've got a blank workbook. And then I get a warning that says the document's not saved, the document may be open, or an error may have been encountered when saving. I'm going to left click OK, so I'm going to put some content in this workbook, save it, go back to Alt-F-H-E, click on Send as PDF again, and the workbook gets converted to a portable document format file. Again, the default email application is opened up where I can address it, put some content in the body of the email, probably change the subject from book one to something that maybe makes a little bit more sense. The good thing about this, the PDF format, is that you can send the content of your workbook to somebody that doesn't have Excel. The bad thing, or which actually could be a good thing depending upon your intentions, is that the PDF format is difficult to modify. It's also somewhat difficult to convert the PDF file back into an Excel spreadsheet. There are a lot of services available on the internet that enables you to send a PDF file and convert it to an Excel file. But there's a couple of things about it that doesn't make it a perfect transition. One is, this is content. So whatever formulas that generated some content, you're not going to get those formulas back. The second thing is that the content that gets converted to an Excel file is contained within tables in a tabular sort of format in the PDF file. So you may not be able to cleanly convert a PDF file that used to be an Excel file back into an Excel file and have it look the same as the Excel file. And you're definitely not going to have any formulas in your Excel file. So I'm going to close that, and we're going to go back once again to Alt-F-H-E and look at the next option, which is to send as an XPS, XML Paper Specification format. This is sort of the sister to the PDF format that was developed by Microsoft. The properties are similar. The XPS is a little bit more difficult to modify than the PDF file. And basically, in order to modify the content in the XPS file, you need to convert it to a PDF file, make your changes, and then convert it back to an XPS file. And there are free downloadable programs that will enable you to do that. And once again, when I click on that option, the workbook gets converted to the XPS file type and attached to an email where I can address it and send it off. Closing that again. To go back once more, Alt-F-H-E. The last option is to send as an Internet fax. And it tells you that you don't need a fax machine, but what you do need is a third-party provider to enable this functionality. Once that third-party service is in place, you can click that option and the content of your workbook will get sent to the recipient as a fax. So those are the options to send your workbook to somebody. You can send it as an attachment, which is a duplicated copy of the original. You can send a link to somebody if the workbook is saved in a shared location, so that you maintain only one instance of the existence of the workbook, and everybody that has access to that workbook can see the latest and greatest version of the workbook. You can send it as a PDF attachment, portable document format attachment, or an XPS, XML paper specification format. Your workbook gets converted to one of these formats, which enables you to send the content of your workbook to somebody that doesn't have Excel, and it captures the content of the workbook in a way that makes it difficult for somebody to change it. And finally, the last option we talked about was to send your workbook as an Internet fax, which requires a third-party service.